Culpeper, you got a smile, man. Here we go. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yay! Good job.
So let's get started. As Jim Lighthizer said, I'm Garry Adelman. I run education at the Civil War Trust. I'm obsessed with the Civil War, and we are standing on a place that is so complex that we won't get into any detail on our short tour at all today. But I think when you try to think about Brandy Station or some of the battles that took place around here, it's easy to get confused when you look at the whole Civil War and the whole war in the East, and you look at Gettysburg and Spotsylvania and Winchester and Petersburg and Richmond and the 7 Days and the Valley and everything like that. It's easy to get confused, but really, in the end, all of the war in the East boils down to just a few big movements, okay? They start around Washington, D.C. in 1861 and fight the Battle of Bull Run. The troops kind of move south as George McClellan tries to take Richmond from the east. Results in the Peninsula Campaign in the 7 Days, where Confederate General Robert E. Lee takes over, pushes McClellan away from Richmond, and strikes out into the north. Those are the battles of Cedar Mountain, of Second Bull Run or Second Manassas, and he gets rebuffed at the Battle of Antietam. So after moving back up north from Maryland, the seat of war moves down not far from this vicinity, where you're going to have actions around Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. Feeling good after 2 great victories for the South, Robert E. Lee moves his army north, and that culminates in the Battle of Gettysburg. On the way up to Gettysburg, there is, of course, a terrible cavalry battle right here at Brandy Station, and we'll talk about that a little bit. The seat of war after Gettysburg will then basically move inexorably south past this area again, and then down to Petersburg and Richmond, west of which the Civil War will end. So really, in summary, the Civil War in the East consists of movements that went from Washington down, up, and down again. And all the most famous battles of the Civil War fought in the East fit into one of those 5 grand movements. The reason I'm talking about that is because every one of those 5 movements results in something happening not only at Brandy Station, but right here on this hill. Okay, you have the Orange and Alexandria Railroad over there. You have Beverly's Ford crossing the Rappahannock River not 3 miles away. And you have the old Carolina Road right here. This is the Route 1529 Lee Highway of its day. So you seriously have all of these transportation facilities happening here, and then you have this long ridge, which is called Fleetwood Hill, but it is also really just one long ridge that goes on for quite a while over here. And every time the troops moved, when the Southerners left Bull Run or Manassas and came south from here, Joe Johnston stops his men here on Fleetwood Hill, establishes a headquarters. When the movement went to Richmond and then the troops started moving north again, the Confederate troops came up here on Fleetwood Hill, putting cannon up here, putting a headquarters up here. They moved north toward Antietam, came back down. The troops ended up on Fleetwood Hill again. Moving northward again toward Gettysburg, there is, of course, this horrible battle here right in the summer of 1863, actually late spring of 1863, June of 1863. They go back north, fight at Gettysburg, fight around Mine Run and Bristow, places you all around here know pretty well, and then they will settle into winter quarters around here. This is the largest camp of the largest Union Army of the Potomac here, on this hill, around this hill, all around Brandy Station. So you literally have everything happening here, and it is no exaggeration when historian Bud Hall calls this the most tramped upon, camped upon, marched upon, and fought over land, not in the Civil War, in American military history. Okay, so we are standing at something that is so complex that it is hard to even wrap your brain around it at all. But what we will do is walk a few feet, because we're going to try to walk along the trail as we go. We'll walk a little bit down this way, maybe talk about the Battle of Brandy Station and some of the other things that happen around there as we continue along the trail. All right.
Pardon me. That's also really good. Yeah, really one of the Air Force Band.
This is tough stuff to wrap your brain around, okay? But so much so that including this trail now, this is of the 16 battlefields in several states on which the Civil War Trust has trails and signage. We have more signs here at Brandy Station than anywhere else. This is a cavalry battle. Okay, and cavalry battles, you know, they're on horseback, so they move around really quickly, and hence this is a huge battlefield, and I'll get into that in just a second. But for now, we're in the spring of 1863. Robert E. Lee coming off a winter where he won at the Battle of Fredericksburg, then wins a smashing victory where his army is outnumbered at least 2-1 at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Him and his men are feeling good, and Lee decides and receives permission to invade the North, threaten northern cities, you know, Baltimore, Washington, Philadelphia, take the war away from Virginia, maybe relieve some pressure on Vicksburg, Mississippi. But the Southerners, in order to do that, have to screen their movements. And one of the things they're going to do is send their cavalry forward under James Ewell Brown Stuart. And Stuart will make his headquarters on this hill as he works to screen the movements, the initial movements of the Southern Army into the North. So they're gathered around here. Now, the Union hadn't really come into its own in terms of its own cavalry yet. They hadn't stood hoof to hoof or toe to toe with the Confederate cavalry with a whole lot of success yet. That would change, of course, in June of 1863 at this particular battle. In order to try to find out whether the Confederates were moving and maybe deal a crushing blow, the Union assembles a strong force of not only cavalry, but some infantry as well. Infantry that'll be doing some serious fighting beyond this at the Battle of Gettysburg a few weeks later. So, as the Southerners are moving north and Stuart has his cavalry around here, the Union comes up, and we did set up these cannons to go off during this tour. So I hope you all are enjoying. We work with the local quarry. Don't worry about it. So the Union comes up with a bold plan to take infantry and cavalry and cross at Beverly's Ford. That's just 3 miles away from here, and they are going to get around the Confederates, but that's not enough. They are also taking 2 other forces that are coming in near Brandy Station under the command of a guy named Wyndham, and coming in astride the railroad over there from Kelly's Ford under the command of a guy named Kilpatrick. So you have Union forces crossing there, and coming from here, the Southerners are in trouble. They don't even know it yet, though. When this battle erupts on June 9th, the early morning, 1863, you are going to have the Confederates fighting the Union beyond places we now call Buford's Knoll and St. James Church. We have trails around there that you can go see. Maybe some of you will go see them today. They're really cool trails, although they don't have the neat and shiny signs. Those are showing some wear, but we have replaced many of them just recently or in the process of it. So the fighting is all over there. Jeb Stuart sees this, leaves his headquarters, which is up on this very hill here, and he will send most of his forces off that way. So they are oriented facing that way, and then all of a sudden, you all of a sudden have a Union force emerging from Brandy Station, not far away from here. And if you have time, check out the graffiti house while you're here. Really neat stuff. Lots of soldier graffiti in here, and you have a Union force attacking this way. Essentially unopposed. The Southerners have a very skeletal force up here at this point, not much to oppose them at all, and all of a sudden there is Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey folks, soldiers on horseback attacking this area here. The Southerners are scraping together whom they can, and Jeb Stuart and his soldiers try and start to work very feverishly in order to get some sort of reinforcements up here. They would arrive in the form of some Virginia cavalry that begin to smash into the Union troops out in this field. This is, I mean, these are, you could just imagine the horses pounding over this hill. I mean, this isn't a normal infantry battle. It's hard to imagine. If you go to a reenactment and you hear 10 or 20 horses rumble by, you know what that's like. Imagine hundreds confronting a couple of thousand coming in this direction. The Union troops begin to fall back, but the New Jerseyans along the old Carolina Road are holding on really tenaciously, and they are pushing back at the Confederates, who themselves begin to fall back, just as another Union force begins to emerge from the trees and astride the railroad over there. Okay, so the Southerners are trying to fight facing that way, and now they're trying to fight facing this way, and all of a sudden here comes another force for the Union. Questions? So as we gather, you'll have noticed, first of all, our last stop was not on nice grass, but you saw some different sort of brown soil whose pH hasn't allowed us to regrow grass yet. Why did we have to regrow grass? Well, because as Jim Lighthizer mentioned, there was a, I think, 6,500-foot mansion right on this hill, okay? And that is a year ago or less. So, what's that?
Was.
Yeah, it was on this hill. We did opt to leave the gazebo there, not because the gazebo is historic, it is not, but because it covers a historic feature, and that is the original Miller House or Fleetwood House well that was up here. There's been some good archaeology done on that. We know it's important, and this is our mitigation effort. It also serves as a decent landmark, and it doesn't look unattractive, so we left it there for that reason. Now, here we are on the other side of the hill, so that fight is raging. The Southerners bring up the 35th Virginia and a couple other Virginia units to try to blunt that. It's not going well for the South, and then arrives under Judson Cavalry Kilpatrick showing up here with men from Maine and from New York pounding up the hill from this direction. Also not good for the Confederates, but they saw it coming. And in this case, Jeb Stuart is now, and his troops are riding back to try to get the Union forces, the Confederate forces that are facing the Union over near St. James Church and what's called Rooney Lee's Hill, to get them pounding back up here to try to stave off this disaster. They're not only going to lose Jeb Stuart's headquarters, they are going to lose the battle. They're going to lose the key position on which every Union and Confederate soldier that came up here recognized the importance of throughout the early years of the war, and then for the next year of the war when the soldiers tromped around here. This is a particularly intense fight. You have men falling at a great rate at this point, and the Southerners just trying to give up every ounce of all of their energy to hold up what they've done before on the Virginia Peninsula, at Antietam, at Cedar Mountain, in Second Bull Run, and in everything they've been involved in. Their honor is at stake here, and they're fighting wildly as Stuart and his men attempt to patch up some sort of a counterattack that'll really blunt the Union force. I know I'm going quick. I think you know what happens here. The Confederate efforts in order to secure the reinforcements that they need are going to come up from that general vicinity from toward St. James Church and Beverly's Ford and sweep up to the top of the hill right as the Union are coming up here, partly in disarray from the success of their initial stroke. Up come the Confederates, and in short, stymie the Union advance, eventually push the Union back enough where Pleasanton and the Union commanders are really thinking, oh my God, things aren't going well anymore, and the Union pulls back. A somewhat anticlimactic ending, but you think about it this way, this is one of the bloodiest engagements or engagements for its size by percentage. There's only 20,000 soldiers here. You have 1,450 killed, wounded, captured, a lot of whom are on this hill right here, and it was enough. The Union at least feels Pleasanton was able to say he had gathered his intelligence, and they move out. This remains the largest cavalry battle of the Civil War. Technically, you could say that it's not the largest all-cavalry engagement of the Civil War because there's some infantry fighting here as well over closer to Buford's Knoll there. Now, moving straight forward, you are going to have the Union and the Confederate struggle in the biggest battle of the Civil War at Gettysburg. And after that, the troops will come back to this general vicinity. There will be two campaigns people don't talk much about, but that we find important. The Bristow campaign, when the Confederates are trying to move toward Washington, and then the Mine Run campaign in November of 1863, when the Union commander, George Gordon Meade, will try to get back at the Confederates before winter settles in. That will not happen. And then the Union Army establishes their headquarters in a huge ring, literally, around this area. 6th Corps, 3rd Corps, 5th Corps, Cavalry Corps. I mean, you can put them all on a map. In fact, we did on our last sign on the trail over here. But during that time, in addition to everything I was telling you about, Fleetwood Hill and Brandy Station in general, this vicinity becomes the most photographed place in the field in the entire Civil War. The only other places more photographed are Washington, D.C. and Richmond during the Civil War. There are more than 400 documentary photos taken at Brandy Station. Okay, some of them in 3D, which is how they recorded most Civil War photographs, most as large format plates. And they show people around camps, they show officers spending a lot of time here. You're talking from December of 1863 into March of 1864, 100,000 and more soldiers splayed out. You can imagine how much these guys eat, how much they have to do, how much room they need to live and to train and whatnot. And you can have a blast with these photos, and you can zoom in on them like crazy, and I want to demonstrate this. You could take photos like this and see what these individual soldiers are wearing. And by the way, Bud Hall has lined up most of these 400 photos, and we know just where they were taken, okay? Now, one thing I want to point out is, like I said, these are taken during the Civil War. That means they're taken on giant glass plates, most of these on 7 by 9 inch plates, about 45 times larger than the 35 millimeter negatives that we most of us grew up with. Okay, what that means is you have an incredible resolution on there, and unlike a 35 millimeter negative or a digital camera, there's no grain or no pixelation. It's a chemical sheet, and you can theoretically blow it up until the molecules get in the way. I mean, that's what it is. These photos have a megapixel resolution of the equivalent of 175,000 megapixels. Now, I don't think your cameras quite do that yet. Okay, so our modern technology is still trying to approach what the Civil War technology is. And I want to give an example of this. Here's a rather well-known photo called What Do I Want, John Henry, a John Henry being sort of a contraband servant that attaches himself to camp. And you can see this photo is taken, what, 15 feet away from it, maybe even 20 feet away from these gentlemen. Well, you could take this photo right here and zoom in on it, and if this guy had his palms up, you would be able to see his fingerprints. I mean, look at the wrinkles and cracks in his hands, okay? And this is one of the other many reasons why Brandy Station is so valuable. We can take these photos, zoom in on them, and determine where things happened, where people were camped, where they wrote the diaries and journals that we can still access to this day. Okay, so there's something really special about being able to use the photography at the most photographed place out in the field. Okay, so there's lots of cool stuff. They didn't just take pictures of camps, by the way. Here you have headquarters shots. This photo was taken from down beyond the hill looking up to where we stand. Some of you might be able to see in the trees on top, you can see the Miller House. That's the house that stood here for many years. It was also called Fleetwood before that. Okay, so up in the trees, trust me, you can see it. And they didn't just take photos far away of this hill. They walked right onto the hill and photographed it in the winter and in the spring. Here's a winter shot showing the 3rd Corps making their headquarters around here under William H. French. And you might be able to see again the house in the trees. This is looking from the press conference chairs toward where we stand. And you can see the Miller House right there. Or some of you can at least. It stood until not all that many years ago, not all that many decades ago. We have pictures of it. Bud Hall saw it standing there. And now, it's not only the house from far away, they took pictures of soldiers camping and hanging out on this hill as well. This one was taken from near that large tree looking back toward where we're standing roughly. Okay, and you can see the Miller House right next to them a little bit. You can see other structures, and we can line those structures up with other shots taken from other angles. If you're a big enough Civil War nerd, this is what you do on Saturday night. And some of you are giving a knowing laugh, not a sad laugh. I feel sorry for you. This structure was on this hill as well, right past the tree, known as the shebang, where soldiers could get some of their needs taken care of. Don't take that the wrong way. And then I think I have one last one to show you. And I'll ask you just to about face real quick. Take a few steps over here. This will be worth it. Just as you gather up, you can see a Union officer. Sorry. You're good. Union officer, and this looks off in this direction. The winter hut that he is next to is right out on that knob there, but some of you in the distance might be able to see a little square box to which I am pointing. Can you see the little square on the horizon there? Yeah. That is, thank you, young man. That is the Beauregard House or mansion, okay? Named after General Beauregard. The name was changed to honor General Beauregard after his success in the First Battle of Bull Run, or the First Battle of Manassas, or the Battle of First Manassas, or the Battle of First Bull Run, and there's about 10 others if you'd like, okay? So Beauregard still stands to this day, a beautiful farm, and you can see it right behind me there. Can you catch that boxy structure to the left of the large, I'll say, elevator pole maybe? Agriculture's not my strong suit.
It's a brick house.
Yes, lovely brick house. Called Beauregard, owned by a guy named Barber. So, in addition to having the battle here, in addition to having a huge camp here, this hill is also a cemetery, as is every Civil War battlefield. If you died here, they dug a hole here and put you in it usually. and then you would be removed to a national cemetery or a Confederate cemetery. Many of the Union troops on here, Bud Hall has identified as being moved to the Culpeper National Cemetery. National cemeteries being new during the Civil War, national cemeteries being established during active wartime. They did not bury commonly Union and Confederate soldiers together, so it becomes a chore to figure these things out. There was a small cemetery on the other side of that hill, on which we might do some archaeology that someday if we were able to get a grant for it. And you know, Fleetwood Hill then after this winter will really pass into obscurity for a while, because the Union and Confederate forces move ever south, like I described at the beginning, toward Richmond, Petersburg, ending up at Appomattox. And this place thereafter remained much as it was in 1863, you know, until recent decades. With the exception of a house over here, you're seeing a scene with more trees, but in every other way similar to what they would have seen in 1863. Let me close it up by saying 100% of the correct stuff I just said was the responsibility of this man, Bud Hall. So thank you for coming on the tour. Thank you, Bud.
Good job.